January 6, 1999. Biography with Peter Graves.
Surrounded by show business talent of immense proportions, he may have been the most talented rat in the infamous pack. Sammy Davis Jr. used his outstanding talents to conquer Broadway, Hollywood, and Las Vegas. He also broke down racial barriers at every stop along the way. Very few entertainers ever had to endure the criticism heaped on Sammy Davis Jr. He was threatened by studio bosses for his choice in women, by the mob for integrating the Rat Pack, and by fellow blacks who called him Sambo Davis and considered him a racial traitor. He looked for relief in drugs and alcohol, but there was only one place Sammy Davis Jr. felt totally comfortable: on stage, entertaining people as no one else could.
Just once in a lifetime, a man knows a moment, one wonderful moment, when fate takes his hand. Well, this is my moment, my once in a lifetime, when I can explore a new and exciting land.
Sammy Davis Jr., the world's greatest entertainer. Exciting, outrageous, tacky, and classy. He was show business.
This is my moment, my destiny calls me, though it may be once in a lifetime.
There was nobody that I know of that I've ever been on stage with who could do everything. That is, he sang, he danced, he told funny stories.
All right, the audience up against the wall, sweetheart. That's it. And I want just cool it with the applause, Charlie.
Well, whenever he came on the scene, you know, everything just started popping. And it was so funny. I mean, he felt it absolutely necessary to make you laugh.
When Sammy Frankendine hit Vegas, hit the Strip, or hit a club, or hit a restaurant, the whole town came alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob the Hope.
You know, people say, show business is my life.
With him it was.
With him, it was his life.
Oh, this is my moment, my destiny's call me, though it may be once in a lifetime. I gotta do good things.
I'd be glad being there around. I'd be glad being there around your shoe. I'd be glad don't go hide, but every nobody mind. I'd be glad when you're there.
Sammy Davis Jr. was born into show business on December 8, 1925. His father, Sam Sr., with Will Maston's Holiday in Dixieland, what was then known as an all-colored review. His mother, Elvira, was one of the show's chorus girls.
I worked with them until maybe about 2 weeks before Sammy was born. That's why he got the talent.
It's very much like, I would imagine, an insurance man who's had an insurance company, and he wants his son to follow in his footsteps. Well, in show business, it was not so much a want as it was a necessity.
When Sammy was 2½, his parents split up. They loved show business more than they loved each other. Little Sammy hit the road with his dad and Will Maston. They billed him as Silent Sam, the dancing midget. And from the very start, he stole the show.
I mean, when he was born, he was basically an opening act. You know, he never went to school, never really had, you know, his friends were all performers who were 15, 20, 50 years older than he was.
You must remember, when you're 5 or 6 years old and you're in show business, doing 2 or 3 a day, and you can wear long pants and everybody else is out, you know, wearing short pants and looking scuffy, and you're looking like a little, well, as I was advertised, the 44-year-old midget, you know. It makes it a kind of a special world, and you're around adults, and that's where all the fun is.
And if you had the least bit of talent, or if one had the least bit of talent in those days, the masterful performers took great pleasure in teaching you things. So it was easy to learn. All you had to do was show an aptitude.
By the time Sammy was 15, he'd crossed the country 23 times with his dad and Will. One thing he'd seen very little of was prejudice. His dad and Will made sure of that. When they were forced to sit in the colored sections of restaurants down south, they'd tell Sammy it was because people were jealous of showfolk. And showfolk didn't care about color. The only thing that mattered to them was talent. Take the boy singer with Tommy Dorsey, Frank Sinatra. He was already on his way up when he introduced himself to Sammy. They were on the same bill in Detroit in 1941. It was the beginning of one of the most famous friendships in show business.
Frank Sinatra, as a friend, he is the kind of guy that every kid in a neighborhood back east where I come from, like in New York, you had one buddy like this. Sometimes you lost touch with him and you never saw him again. But you always had one guy that you said to yourself in your heart, this is my friend. He is my friend, and he is, to me, one of the nicest human beings I've ever known in my life.
But Sammy wouldn't always have friends like Frank Sinatra or his dad and Will around to protect him.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Drafted into the Army, Sammy was placed in one of the first integrated units in U.S. military history. The experience was a nightmare.
Captain Craig, who was the head of Special Services, his assistant was a female, a fairly attractive lady, and she came over to ask me, did I want to get into Special Services? Obviously, this was observed by a group of guys, and they saw me talking to her, and this, that, and the other. 2 or 3 days later, I was in the service club, and the cats grabbed me outside. Said, you want to be white, you're going to talk to white women and all this. These were all white guys. And a scuffle ensued, and they took me and stripped me up and painted me white.
At first, Sammy fought back with his fists. But then he discovered he had an even more powerful weapon to fight prejudice: his talent.
They had never seen a black man do Jimmy Cagney or Jimmy Stewart or any of the popular guys. So I started doing it in the Army when I got with this integrated group. The white guys would laugh, and the black guys would look at me like this.
When Sammy got out of the service, he took stock of his life. He knew he wanted people to like him and treat him with dignity. But without looks, money, or an education, how could he get what he wanted? There was only one way. He had to become a star.
He realized that he was going to be famous. And he used to sit back in the dressing room and practice signing his name. Sammy Davis Jr. And he worked on that real hard.
Reuniting with his dad and Will, Sammy began doing more than just dancing. He began singing and doing impressions.
The first night, we were working at a place called Shep's Playhouse. At the opening night, I step up and I say, thank you very much. It's nice to be out of the Army. I got something that my dad and uncle don't know that I can do. We talked about it, but I never got a chance to do it for them. I'm going to do it for you nice folks tonight. And I said, how about Jimmy Stewart? You know, well, gee whiz, I'd really like to say that it really is a pleasure to be back among my own folk. And well, they went, rah! We got off the stage, people were standing. We got into the dressing room. My father said, if you ever do that again, I'm going to kill you.
By 1946, the trio got their first gig in what was soon to become the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas.
Because this little thing about the boogie piggy, and it did the boogie all the way home. All right, guys. Boogie piggy. All right, guys. All right, guys. All right, guys. Boogie piggy with the yoink.
On stage, they were a smash. But Offstage was another story.
Black acts couldn't even come in the front door of a hotel. Black acts working in Vegas couldn't stay in the hotel. And this was Lena and Harry Belafonte and Nat Cole, because there was a very hard color line.
New York wasn't much better. When Sammy went with friends to see Frank Sinatra at the Copacabana, he was turned away at the door. But the next night, Frank made Sammy come back and walk in by himself. Sammy had broken down a barrier, and it wouldn't be the last. The Will Maston Trio, starring Sammy Davis Jr., was about to get its biggest break.
If you were in vaudeville and had graduated to presentation and then graduated into saloons, nightclubs, every time you walked on the stage, if you were an opening act, you prayed that that show, that night, there would be someone who was sitting in the audience and very much vis-a-vis as the movies do, hey, kid, you're the guy we've been looking for. Yes, there was a night like that.
It was Academy Awards night, 1952. The trio was opening for Janice Page at the hottest club in Hollywood, Ciro's.
Yeah, he was supposed to do about 10 or 15 minutes. And he hit the stage with about a 30-foot knee slide and went into a tap dance routine you could not believe, then went into vocal impressions.
Now listen to you, Muggs. You know this is Wise Guy. Mrs. Robinson, that's right. Eddie Robinson, that's me.
And then he played every instrument in the band, did a couple of dramatic songs, then told a bunch of jokes, and the place went nuts.
After 25 years in show business, Sammy Davis Jr. was an overnight success.
The other night I saw the Will Maston Trio and one of the greatest hunks of talent I've ever seen in my life, Sammy Davis Jr.
Backstage after the show, Eddie gave Sammy a mezuzah, a Hebrew charm containing blessings for good luck, health, and happiness. Sammy wore it from that moment on, and luck was with him. Decca Records signed him to a long-term contract. His first single, Hey There, went to the top of the charts. In Vegas, he broke the long-standing color line when the Frontier Hotel offered the trio its best suites while they appeared there. But one night, Sammy forgot to wear the mezuzah. It was the night his career and life almost ended. Sammy was driving with a friend from Vegas to L.A. for a recording session when the car alongside him suddenly tried to make a U-turn in front of him. As Sammy hit the car, his head smashed against the steering column. Then Sammy became aware of the blood streaming down his face. Just before he lost consciousness, he fell to his knees and prayed, begging that the stardom he'd worked all his life for wouldn't be taken away from him.
You're watching Sammy Davis Jr. on Biography.
Days after the car accident, Sammy Davis Jr. regained consciousness, only to find out the crash had cost him his left eye. Frightened, Sammy wondered if he'd ever perform again. But with the encouragement of friends like Frank Sinatra, Tony Curtis, and Humphrey Bogart, Sammy began to regain his confidence. Less than 3 months later, they were all sitting ringside when Sammy made his triumphant comeback at Ciro's in Hollywood.
Well, he was nervous, and he had an eye patch on, and the place was jammed. There were stars as far as you could see it. And he came out that night and absolutely pulverized an audience. And the next day, I think certainly everyone there and everyone who heard about it generally accepted the fact that this was maybe the biggest talent that we'd ever seen.
The accident was a turnaround. You know, that turned the career around. We went from an act that got $3,500 a week to $25,000, only because of the heat that the publicity had brought on it, on the act and on me as a personality.
With a vengeance, Sammy began to make up for the years of struggle. Spending sprees, parties every night, and an endless parade of women became as much a part of Sammy's fame as his talent.
It was just, Sammy was the king of excess. He was the king. He worked his ass off, and he worked 50 weeks a year. Worked his ass off. Made a lot of money, spent a lot of money, and did everything he wanted. And if he couldn't afford it, screw it. He'd do it anyway and figure out a way.
There was no middle gear with Sammy. He would be asleep for a few hours a night, and from the time he got up, it was what they call pedal to the metal. He went for it.
I went crazy, went bananas, you know, because you want to buy all the things you can never have. Then you start, we all have fetishes and toys that we like to have. And you start living beyond your means, which is the oldest story in the world, which makes performers notorious.
Sammy was the hottest act in show business. The offers kept pouring in. But Sammy wanted more than TV guest shots and nightclub gigs. In 1956, he got it.
The three figures you see approaching are the men who really break it up for the Mr. Wonderful audience of 6 nights a week here in Manhattan. And here they come, one of the most exciting acts in entertainment history, the Will Maston Trio, starring Sammy Davis Jr.
The show, Mr. Wonderful, was fantastic for many reasons. The first act was the play, the libretto. The second act was cleverly his club act. You could just sit back and just say, hey, I am being entertained here myself, even though I didn't pay a ticket. Most of all, I'm being taught. It was just the most phenomenal experience. One of the many I've had in the theater, but that's right up there at the top.
Sammy was the toast of Broadway for nearly a year. But when the show closed, there were problems. Sammy was still working with his dad and Will Maston, and the talk in the business was that Sammy would be better off on his own.
And then all the bookers throughout the country, they did not want anything to do with Will Maston or Sam Sr. And Sam wouldn't hear of it because his allegiance was to his father and his uncle who brought him all this way.
Thank you very, very much. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I must be completely honest and say that people are always asking me about these two gentlemen. They say, why does a kid work with his dad and uncle? He does all of the work, all of those kind of ideas. But I would like to state, in my humble opinion, that these two gentlemen give me more class, just standing on either side, than I could ever hope to attain out here for an hour by myself.
They just, you know, were part of the act until they just literally couldn't do the time step anymore.
There were even bigger problems for Sammy. Walking the fine line between pleasing white audiences and maintaining his roots in the black community wasn't always easy.
Sammy had to exist in both worlds. And certain people who didn't have acceptance in both worlds used to get pissed seeing Sammy have that acceptance. People who wanted what Sammy had.
People were constantly putting Sammy down, except for the group that would come to see him.
What Sammy's fellow performers wanted more than anything else was Sammy's versatility.
So when we saw him perform, when he reached his optimum level of exposure, we just did what we call go back to the woodshed. We all developed more aspects of our own talents than we had previously attempted to do.
For all his success, Sammy still hadn't escaped prejudice. In New York, he was given the cold shoulder when he tried getting into swank night spots like the El Morocco and the Stork Club. Hollywood wasn't exactly colorblind either. Sammy literally had to beg for the chance to do a dramatic role on TV. When he finally got one, the show's sponsor, fearful of upsetting viewers in the South, kept the program on the shelf for months.
I'm not your papa. Joey, don't you know I'm not your papa? Look, I don't need you, kid. I don't need you, Joey. I'm in the Army and I don't need you. That's wrong, Joey. I need you. Joey, I'll be back for you. Honest, I'll be back. Joey, look at me. I love you, Joey, and I'll be back for you.
Not long after, he landed the part of Sportin' Life in the film version of Porgy and Bess. For a movie buff like Sammy, it was a dream come true.
He loved not only to do them, but to watch them. Yeah, movie buff. He knew whenever we were on the road one night, there was some actor in a film, we couldn't remember his name, so it was called Sam. And all we did was describe the picture, and he said, Albert Basserman. He knew who it was. I mean, it was like, he had a sense of film history.
Controversy followed Sammy back to Hollywood when he began dating Kim Novak. There were rumors they were going to get married. There were also rumors that Kim's boss, Columbia studio chief Harry Cohn, had asked the mafia to bust up the romance. Whatever the reason, Kim and Sammy stopped seeing each other. About the same time, Sammy stirred up even more trouble when he announced he was converting to Judaism.
I know that at a certain time in his life, he was looking to fill in some blank spaces in his life. And he had met Rabbi Max Nussbaum, who at the time was the senior rabbi at Temple Israel of Hollywood. And after a period of study with him, he became a Jew by choice. And I know that from that time forward, he always valued as being part of the Jewish people.
You know, I mean, he pretty much ran the gamut of hate. You know, you could hate him for being black or Jewish, or short, or gaudy. You could hate him for a bunch of things, you know.
Religion wasn't enough for Sammy. He began drinking, and drinking heavily. Drunk one night in Vegas, he asked Lorraine White, a chorus girl he once dated, to marry him. The next morning, Sammy woke up to find his proposal had made the papers. To save face, he and Lorraine went through with the wedding. They didn't fool anybody. The marriage was over in 3 months. The world was closing in on Sammy. The bad press, the phony marriage, the drinking, the partying. It got to the point where he couldn't stand going on stage anymore. And so he decided to end it all. One night he got in his car, stepped on the gas, and aimed for the edge of a cliff above Hollywood. As he reached the edge, the axle snapped. The car stopped dead. Once again, Sammy had been given another chance. And this time, it looked as if he'd have it all.
You're watching Sammy Davis Jr. on Biography.
Life is a woman, an endless surprise, always opening up your heart and closing your eyes.
Her name was Mai Britt. She was starring in a remake of Marlene Dietrich's The Blue Angel, when Sammy spotted her while having lunch at 20th Century Fox. When he asked his friends about her, they told him, forget it. Mai wasn't into the Hollywood social scene. Sammy wouldn't listen. He pursued her the way he had pursued stardom. He never gave up. Sammy was on a roll. Not only was he in love, he was making entertainment history. The Rat Pack had come to Vegas. While shooting the film Ocean's 11, Sammy, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford were appearing on stage together at the Sands Hotel. Every night was like a party.
What'd you come up with, Daddy? I don't know, but I'm gonna make one more turn with this, and there ain't no writing on it. We under arrest, Daddy. Does that say LM on there? Yeah, long mother. Yeah.
You know, when he used to be on the same stage as Frank, and he used to come off the stage and he said, now let him pass that.
Why can't I fall in love just like any other man? And maybe then I'll know what kind of fool I
That was the barometer for which Sammy shot. And that's one of the things that chewed him up a little bit.
And Frank is always, you know, because he is the leader. He's thinking all the time, you know, making up little games to play like, let's punch someone out, things like that. You know? It's wonderful, and he, you know, people are always writing down notes and requests for songs for Frank or Dean and myself to sing. And Frank said, let's play cards. You know, at night, those people decide, you know, the loser sings the song. So I'd like to sing a couple of songs for you.
Frank was his idol. He loved Frank, and Frank loved him. Sammy probably had one big flaw, is that he wanted to be Frank. He wanted to live like Frank. He wanted to spend like Frank. He wanted to do what Frank did. Well, it's difficult even for Frank to be Frank.
Sammy was so loyal to Frank that he and Mai postponed their wedding until after the 1960 presidential election. Frank and the Rat Pack had campaigned for John Kennedy, and Sammy didn't want to hurt JFK's chances of getting elected.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The night before the Kennedy inaugural, Frank staged an all-star gala. Everyone was there. Everyone but Sammy and Mai. The president's aides thought his and Mai's presence might offend Southern politicians. Sammy couldn't believe it. If the President of the United States could do this to him, he wondered if things would ever change.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
August 1963, the Civil Rights March on Washington. Sammy was one of the 300,000 people who marched that day. But for him, the best way to break down doors was still through his talent.
We were in Puerto Rico, and he called a meeting, as he was wont to do anytime he felt like it. He said, look, this is the way this situation is going to work. Every time I hit the stage, I'm giving 150%. Say, I hope you won't mind or you don't feel offended if I ask you for 110. And that's where it went, all the time. No matter however he was feeling or whatever, that's the way it went.
He always felt he could do anything on stage. And he lived for the audience. He was never fearful of the audience. And he would work at things, for example, he would do things with twirling a gun and fast draw, and he was brilliant at it.
I spied a young cowboy wrapped up in white lace. Shucks, I wouldn't put it on unless I was good at it.
He wanted more than anything else to make that audience rise up from wherever they were. And he did every single night, every place he was. And if they came in feeling terrible, they sure left feeling great.
By the early 60s, Sammy was an international superstar, a hit in movies, TV, nightclubs, and records around the world. In 1963, Sammy announced he was going back to Broadway to star in the musical version of Golden Boy. Mai was thrilled. For the first time since she and Sammy got married, they would be living in one place more than a few weeks. They were parents now, with 3 children, and this would be their chance to finally be a family. But Sammy had other priorities. He was one of the kings of show business and planned to stay on top no matter what the cost. Before long, Mai and the kids were seeing less of Sammy than ever.
He was doing Golden Boy 8 performances a week on Broadway. He was shooting a film called A Man Called Adam. He was also doing benefits that he had signed up before. And in the middle, he's doing a little series for NBC.
A few days after Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow announced their separation, Sammy and Mai followed with news of their split up.
Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a husband or a father. Come to think of it, I didn't exactly stop the world as a human being either.
Sammy was alone again. But if he couldn't be the best husband or father, he was determined to be the best Sammy Davis Jr.
Enjoying tonight's biography on A&E and you want to learn more about famous lives, then you'll love your local Barnes & Noble bookstore. Lose yourself in more than 150,000 titles. Browse the newsstand. Savor the cafe. Let your kids explore the wonders of reading and visit the exclusive biography section where you'll find a wide selection of biography videotapes and biography magazine. It's all at Barnes & Noble, the book lover's second home.
It seems
seems that I'm the only one that I have been thinking of.
The day his wife and kids moved out of the house, Sammy Davis Jr. lost everything he had personally. But professionally, at least he still had the love of the people who really mattered, his audience. In the late 60s, they saw a new Sammy.
Sammy wanted to be all things to all people. Sammy was always running for office. You know what I mean? If Mick Jagger became hip, Sammy wanted to throw on the bell-bottoms or whatever it was, or you're talking about all this crazy, it's the psychedelic era.
But in the middle of the happening, a tragedy.
Reverend Martin Luther King crusaded for civil rights through peaceful demonstrations. An assassin's bullet felled King as he stood on the balcony of this motel.
The night of the assassination, Sammy went on every TV station in New York to plead for calm.
I beg them to hold their emotions in check, particularly during the period of mourning that we have for a man who stood for something. We cannot desecrate what this man stood for.
The assassination of Martin Luther King and of Bobby Kennedy a few weeks later sent Sammy into an emotional tailspin. Not only were they heroes to him, they were friends.
Sadness and tragedy and complete sort of void and emptiness. I just hope that the assassinations that have been going on in America and that unwanted violence will not, maybe my people will come to their senses and stop it, because we can't afford to just keep killing each other.
Sammy began drinking more than ever. His parties got wilder. For a while, he even dabbled in the occult and started using cocaine. If there was anybody who could keep Sammy from completely going off the deep end, it was his assistant, Shirley Rhodes.
Sammy loved Shirley more than I think he's probably ever loved anybody. You know, she was the only person that could tell him when he was being a goddamn fool.
The one bright spot in Sammy's life was a dancer named Altaviz Gore. She was fun, easy to be with, and loved show business. After Sammy married her in 1970, they quickly earned a reputation as the most flamboyant couple in Hollywood. As he approached 50, Sammy had far from settled down. He became obsessed with a fear of growing old. When singer Tom Jones came to him with a song about an aging dancer, Sammy said, "Forget it."
I didn't want to do it. I thought I was going to wind up that guy, that old man, stumbling on the street at the age I am now, with no fame, with no nothing, having never made it with the frayed cuffs, but trying to keep an inner dignity.
We can make the sunrise, sprinkle it with dew, color it with chocolate or a miracle or two. The candy man can.
His fears were unfounded. Sammy was still on top in the early 70s. With The Candy Man, he had the biggest hit of his recording career. On TV, he guest starred on the #1 show, All in the Family. And when he kissed the racist Archie Bunker, he contributed to one of the longest laughs in television history. That same year, Sammy gave another display of affection that wasn't perceived as funny.
The hugging of Nixon didn't bother me at all. Sammy has hugged everyone except Adolf Hitler. Where else but in America could one grown man hug another grown man and get invited to his house later?
What the Nixon people did was fascinating. They used to send all these guys around, and these people with a straight face would come to Sammy and suggest maybe, you know, when he was ready to retire, maybe with his stature, maybe there was an ambassadorship around. Now, Sammy could have been ambassador to Tiffany's, Cartier's, Hermes, Gucci. That was pretty much it.
After the Nixon hug, the public perception of Sammy went from superstar to self-parody. The years of drinking and drugs were also catching up with him. One night, he was so stoned that he came out on stage, sang one song, then said goodnight. Friends like Bill Cosby couldn't stand to see what Sammy was doing to himself.
You know, when you see someone and they're abusing themselves, I don't care how much you admire them or how high up on this imaginary pedestal you put them. My yelling at him and berating him was totally selfish because I wanted to see Sammy Davis Jr. I didn't want to see this fool out there.
Sammy finally quit drugs, but alcohol was another story. He kept drinking until he landed in the hospital with a diseased liver. The doctors told him that if he took another drop, he'd die. If that wasn't enough, he needed surgery on his hip. A half-century of dancing had taken its toll. Then, as Sammy was just about ready to get back on stage, he was struck by another blow. George Rhodes, Shirley's husband and Sammy's musical director for over 30 years, died suddenly of a heart attack.
And maybe then I'll know what kind of
Sammy wondered if it was time to pack it all in.
just once in a lifetime, a man knows a moment.
By the late 1980s, Sammy Davis Jr. had his act together again, on and off stage. He wasn't just a star anymore. He was a legend, getting the respect and honor he deserved. In 1988, Sammy returned to the movies and made what he considered to be his best film, Tap. Playing an aging dancer, he got the chance to work with all the hoofers he idolized as a kid, and a few younger ones who felt the same way about him. That same year, Sammy returned to another chapter from his past. The Rat Pack was getting together one more time. When Dean left the tour after a few weeks, Frank and Sammy brought in another legend, Liza Minnelli.
The buzz, the energy that was in the air for that tour was just incredible. And Sammy, you know, night after night, he was killing. He was just, this was like a rare opportunity to be playing in stadiums, and he wanted everybody to feel like it was like they were right in his living room.
Being on the road most of the year, Sammy rarely got a chance to see his own living room. So wherever he went, he'd take all the comforts of home with him.
He would, you know, have all these pictures packed, and, you know, even had like a mini kitchen and food and, you know, all his clothes, you know, like all these shoes. Imelda Marcos had nothing on him.
On the road or at home, Sammy's new love was cooking. It was more than just a hobby. It kept him from drinking.
Now, the worst part about his cooking was you could never get the same thing twice. So if there was a dish that you absolutely loved, Sammy could not reproduce it. He couldn't reproduce it. So you just had to live with the memory.
In 1989, Sammy celebrated his 60th year in show business. To commemorate the occasion, producer George Schlatter put together an all-star salute to Sammy to benefit the United Negro College Fund. While plans for the event were getting underway, Sammy's throat began bothering him. So much so that he went to see a doctor.
Some of us had suspected that something was wrong. Couldn't put our hands on it because out of no more than respect for him, you don't walk up and say, what's the problem?
He called a meeting, as he did occasionally, and the mood in the room was not like, you know, jovial or anything. I said, well, that's kind of strange. And so Sammy was standing up, and he had a cigarette in his hand, and he said, Big C, that's what he called me Big C. He said, you know, I have some news. He says, now, when I tell you, I've already told the guys, so I have to tell you now. He says, I have carcinoma.
So I went to see Sam right away, and we sat there, and Sam said, no, I'll kick it. And they had told Sammy that They could give him a good chance to make it if they removed the voice box, if they performed an operation on him. And Sammy said if he couldn't sing, he didn't want to live. And so instead of that, they performed the radiation.
Suddenly, the planned tribute was more than just another all-star spectacular. It became an outpouring of love for one of the greatest entertainers of all time.
And I say, here's to you, Sam. You know I love you. I can't say it any more than that. You're my brother.
There was a sense of history about that night. Everybody seemed to know that this may be the last time we have a chance to thank this man for all those years of pleasure he's given us.
Sammy wasn't scheduled to perform that night. He was just too sick. But the emotion of the evening moved him to put on his tap shoes.
And Sammy got up. He'd only been out of bed about 8 hours, I guess, and with the chemotherapy and no weight and very weak, and Sam danced.
Now stop time. Stop time.
And if you look at that number, this is not a dying man going through the motions. This was the world's best tap dancer at the peak of his form, and Gregory, who is the heir apparent, sweating to keep up with Sammy, the master.
It was the last time Sammy danced in public.
One night he came out to dinner, just himself. He already had the thing, and it was about 2 weeks before he died. And he was really ticked off that he was dying. And he was very upset about who was going to use his kitchen, and who was going to play on his tennis court, and who was going to be in this house that he spent his whole life paying for and wasn't paid off yet. And just spewed out all of this stuff, just stuff that was on his head. And 2 weeks later, he was gone.
On May 16th, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. died.
Sammy was not the last of a kind, as is being said on television today. He's not the last of a kind. There was no Sammy before Sammy. And there is no Sammy on the horizon. Sammy was the only of a kind.
I knew a man, Bojangles, and he danced for you. In worn out shoes, silver hair, ragged shirt, baggy pants.
Sammy was an event.
He would
and he was an event when he arrived, and he was an event when he left. I just am glad we were part of the event.
Mr. Bojangles, I come back and dance, 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 dance.
Time would be perfect right now for him, because there's nobody who can match Sammy.
Mr. Bojangles. Damn, that man could dance. Yeah. Mr. Bojangles.
As we've seen, Sammy Davis Jr. did everything big. He was famous for spending twice as much money as he made, and he died owing millions of dollars in taxes. The government sold his homes and auctioned off his worldly goods. Sammy's widow, Altaviz, was forced to work at minimum wage jobs and move in with her parents. It took her 7 years to reach a settlement with the government. She recently commented about her husband by saying, "The true story of Sammy Davis Jr. has not yet been told." Aldavise Davis promises to write a book and set the record straight. Tomorrow on Biography, Ava Gardner. I'm Peter Graves. Thanks for watching.
If you are having a party and you don't know who to bring, if you are having a party.
Now, they may have been called the Mickey Mouse Mob, but their antics were far from comical. The LA Mob on American Justice, next on A&E.
Don't go to Tony Newley. Don't go to Frank Sinatra. Don't go to the Beatles. The Beatles, all right, you can go to. Don't go to anybody else but me. And remember my name. Please remember my name. My name is Sammy Davis. 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 My name is Sammy.
A&E. Escape the ordinary.